Imagine a world where there's no poaching, no sanctions busting, no walls at borders.
All of this made possible by a global network of sensors fused with the power of artificial intelligence.
In that same world, empowered by the same technology, pandemics are quickly stopped. There is no crime, and privacy is dead.
Satellites for hire cover every square meter of the planet and can track anyone at any time.
Social scoring follows you everywhere you go.
Predictive AI acts automatically to stop actions objectionable to the authorities before they even happen.
We stand at a crossroad, and the path to our future is being paved by two countries whose ideology stands in direct opposition to one another. China uses surveillance and artificial intelligence with brutal efficiency by blending business and government to control its people, and as an economic weapon to quietly assert its influence worldwide. In China, privacy is a casualty of its ambition for global dominance and given little consideration by its leaders or its citizens.
In contrast, America's relationship with privacy is uneasy at best. The United States restricts its government's use of both surveillance and AI, while nearly the unchecked tracking of its citizens by businesses for profit means the most private details are available for purchase and governed largely by corporate policy. In the US, we have traded away our privacy for services and convenience. As it has been said, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. To understand what these very different futures might look like, let's examine how China and the United States have responded to the chaos of protest and the pandemic.
There are 12 million mostly Muslim Uyghurs living in China's northwest territory of Xinjiang. After the Communist Revolution of 1949, the Han-majority government of Beijing took control of the resource-rich region, and large numbers of Han began settling, causing tension between the two communities. These tensions culminated in violent protests in the summer of 2009, protests triggered by brutal ethnic violence directed against the Uyghurs and caught on camera. China's aggressive response to the Uyghur uprising almost instantaneously evolved into a particularly brutal crackdown against an ethnic minority. According to some activists, 10,000 Uyghurs disappeared overnight, and over the past decade, it's estimated that another 1 million Uyghurs have also disappeared, representing the biggest mass internment of an ethnic minority since the Third Reich. Today, the Uyghurs represent the most surveilled population on Earth, as China uses every tool of digital authoritarianism to physically and politically control them, tracking and measuring their political pliancy with severe repercussions for those deemed untrustworthy. Hundreds of thousands of surveillance cameras with purposefully built-in bias, facial recognition software algorithms tuned to spot the Uyghur face, as well as AI-powered sensors invade every aspect of the Uyghur's life. On mobile phones, the state requires Uyghurs to install a nanny app with algorithms tuned to spot ideological viruses, chat logs referencing Quran verses, Arabic script in image files, Muslim sermons, even purchases such as prayer rugs and Islamic books. Every movement of the Uyghurs is tracked and their phones are monitored remotely. Every activity is logged. They are stopped multiple times per day at checkpoints and city perimeters so that their faces can be scanned, their phones can be examined, and even health data such as height, voice print, and blood samples for DNA can be extracted and matched. All of this data is indexed, geotagged, time-stamped, correlated, and mined, and used to actively suppress, oppress, and destroy this ethnic and religious minority group. Any attempt to avoid surveillance by turning off or burying their phones or even freezing their data cards results in detention, questioning, arrest, or disappearance. Xi Jinping has served as the president of China for over 8 years, and his goal of Chinese dominance extends to the terrifying intersection of surveillance and artificial intelligence. Xi's goal of deploying an all-seeing surveillance platform as the ultimate system of social control using AI and ML to identify and eliminate dissenters in real time is closer to reality than we realize, and the Uyghurs are his testing ground. The future Beijing envisions is one where the Uyghur experiment is carried out on a global scale, a digital Silk Road with control over telecommunications networks, AI capabilities, cloud computing platforms, e-commerce and mobile payment systems, all as part of the most consequential surveillance ecosystem ever conceived. A society where AI-enabled and networked facial recognition cameras embedded throughout cities and even in police gear correlate data in real time from vehicles, smart homes, smart watches, smart speakers, phones, social media platforms, payment systems, instrumenting and monitoring every aspect of our lives. All of this data is analyzed and used to generate a social score so that the state can determine in real time who represents a threat and therefore must be dealt with, and who is trustworthy and should be rewarded. In this future, our worth as individuals is no longer the subject of philosophical debate, but measured simply in terms of our utility to the state. There is hope. Surveillance technology that's used to destroy freedom can also be used to report abuse and inspire action to protect human rights. For example, while China continues to deny the existence of Uyghur internment camps, satellite imagery has confirmed their existence as well as the rapid expansion to accommodate the ever-increasing number of Uyghurs who continue to disappear from their communities.
China is an ideological superpower looking to restore itself as a dominant economy in the 21st century through all means available to it, sacrificing the individual to the imperatives of the state. It has a clarity of purpose and demonstrated willpower that is equal parts inspiring and terrifying.
Here in the US, where the foundation of our government is built on the sanctity of the individual, dissent and the government's response to it take a profoundly different shape.
On January 6, 2021, the 117th Congress of the United States was in session to count the Electoral College ballots of the 2020 U.S. presidential election and confirm Joe Biden's victory over Donald Trump. Trump held a Stop the Steal political rally, which was followed by a march to the Capitol itself. The march turned violent as a group of right-wing extremists stormed the Capitol building to disrupt the count. In the wake of the Capitol siege, you might have expected to hear loud demands for greater surveillance to prevent future incidents of this nature. There were some, but the bigger revelation was the breathtaking extent of surveillance that was already available. The New York Times assembled a clear picture of how the combination of mobile phone, advertiser, and social media data can be used to fully reconstruct one man's participation in the riots. Starting with his trip from home in Kentucky, to his time at Trump's rally, all the way to the steps of the Capitol. A deleted Facebook post clearly documents him at the steps of the Capitol during the insurrection. Then, available geolocation data suggests he was inside the Capitol itself, which was further confirmed by a ping from his phone. Tracking individuals like Ronnie Vincent is yesterday's news. Our ability to track entire groups of Americans is now readily available and increasingly free. An example of this is the Faces of the Riot site, created by a college student in the greater DC area who used open source software to identify 6,000 pictures of people's faces at and around the riot on January 6th. The data was sourced from the Parler social network when hackers exploited a bug that allowed for extraction and analysis of over 800 videos. In a complete role reversal from China, U.S. citizens' use of surveillance is being used to inform the government's understanding of what happened at the insurrection.
If the Uyghur crisis in China and the Capitol insurrection in the US give us views into how each country reacted to unique events, the pandemic provides a historic opportunity to study how the US and China reacted to the same catalyzing event.
On January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a global health emergency. Each country responded with its own values and culture, and the differences between their actions could not be clearer. China mobilized all tools of national power to fight the pandemic, control the narrative, and project an image of total control over the outbreak. The US responded with a patchwork of government remedies, conspiracy theories, and businesses were left to fill the resulting vacuum.
China's response to the pandemic was swift and severe. It immediately instituted a strict lockdown in Hubei province. Tens of thousands of checkpoints were set up and public transportation was suspended. In cities and villages across China declared an all-out people's war on the coronavirus, using surveillance technology, surveillance cameras, facial recognition, and mobile tracking apps as their weapon of choice. Cameras were installed inside homes, ostensibly to enforce quarantines. Drones equipped with loudspeakers tracked and chastised citizens ignoring the lockdown, and GPS and temperature tracking tools together with automated contact tracing apps were used to control and contain the spread of the virus. All of this was augmented with a robust human surveillance network that kept tabs on citizens and enforced government rules. A man with a high temperature at a shopping center slipped away on a motorbike and was quickly tracked down at his home by officials using a citywide network of facial recognition cameras. In Tianjin, over 9,000 people were quarantined as officials used facial recognition cameras to identify shoppers who had visited a department store linked to a COVID outbreak. That the cameras stored footage for 90 days was critical for effective contact tracing. The pandemic normalized the broad rollout of a tracking app across hundreds of cities throughout China, the Alipay Health Code, which correlates self-entered information with a user's digital footprint across the Alibaba platform. Issuing a simple green, yellow, red QR code, which not only dictates whether individuals should be quarantined or allowed into subways, malls, and other public spaces, but also shares that information with police, setting a template for new forms of automated social control that could persist long after the pandemic subsides. Controlling its population was only part of China's COVID containment strategy. The other part involved controlling China's COVID narrative. As the US and the world struggled with overwhelmed healthcare systems and rising death tolls, China used both censorship and propaganda to spread a very different narrative about its handling of COVID. From suppressing early reports on the emergence of the virus, to online censorship of any content critical of Beijing, to attempts to compromise medical research into COVID-19 vaccines, China launched an effective global influence campaign and worked tirelessly to project a global model for pandemic response and leadership, a narrative that can be challenged by technology. Hawkeye 360 is a new surveillance capability that uses a constellation of satellites to track radio frequency signals around the globe. In April 2020, as Beijing announced that the pandemic was under control and that 70% of the docks in Wuhan were back to operating, Hawkeye 360 imagery showed something very different, that the port was essentially still shut down to traffic, casting doubt on Beijing's claims that life in Wuhan was almost back to normal. There is hope. Surveillance technology can serve as a source for ground truth when facts are in dispute.
While China declared an all-out war, the United States, from the federal government to state leaders to individuals, were ambivalent and often confused about the best path forward, especially in the early days. Contradicting narratives, wild speculation, and a culture of individualism at all costs led to confusion, paralysis, inaction, and ultimately tragedy. In most jurisdictions, there was no contact tracing, and where it existed, it was for the most part an opt-in process. Instead of state-instituted digital surveillance platform reinforced with a network of human monitors and the police, the US left it up to people, companies, and states to develop their own containment strategy. As a result, the United States still doesn't have a functioning contact tracing infrastructure. As states instituted, revised, and reversed pandemic protocols on a disturbingly frequent basis, company CEOs stepped in and became sometimes the primary source of facts and information. They regularly communicated with their workforce about the steps they were taking to keep them safe and jointly created a virtual work environment that met their employees' competing demands at home, especially during lockdowns. Fever camera sales resulted in a massive explosion during this time, purchased largely by concerned businesses rather than government mandate. Not surprisingly, in January 2021, Edelman published its Trust Barometer, which showed that for the first time, business replaced government as the most trusted institution by the US public, and it was seen as being twice as competent.
Through protests and pandemics, China's relationship with privacy is very clear. It has no use for it.
The United States' relationship with privacy, on the other hand, is deeply conflicted. In order to understand China's position and the US's ambivalence, we need to first grasp how each country arrived at this moment.
Privacy is a modern construct that has grown out of the rise of industrialization, urbanization, and increasing wealth. Throughout most of human history, not only was there no concept of privacy, it wasn't even possible given how humans lived. Homes had no internal walls, bedrooms and beds were communal, baths were taken in public. Every member of a community was a spy, observing the activities of other members of the community. Early innovations such as the postcard, the telephone, the telegraph, actually decreased privacy, giving strangers the ability to peek into the lives of their friends and their neighbors. During the American Civil War, President Lincoln did not hesitate to grant his Secretary of War, Edward Stanton, the unfettered ability to tap telegraph lines and intercept all communications, as part of the war effort. The term right to privacy was coined in 1890 by future Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis as a reaction to an emerging tabloid industry. Fueled by the advent of photography and audio recordings, newspapers had begun publishing embarrassing facts about private lives and affairs, and Brandeis felt that a line had been crossed. It took another 80 years in the seminal Fourth Amendment case Katz v. U.S. for the concept of a right to privacy to be recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court. Since that decision, as a society, we've struggled with the concept of privacy, what it means, what should be protected, and how it should be protected. Even as we debate and enact a tapestry of privacy laws that attempt to protect and govern the use of our data, we continue to instrument our bodies, our homes, our cities, our workplaces, increasingly enabling ubiquitously deployed sensors to capture all the signals we emit, create a pattern of life, and sell it to whoever will pay.
Unlike the US, China has an epic tradition of using information flow for power, understanding the value of surveillance in securing that power, and using surveillance to control its people and root out dissent. China has a long history of creating prolific intelligence networks and controlling the flow of information. From the Song Dynasty's use of locals to monitor residents with elegant walled cities in the 11th century, to the great Khans who 200 years later devised the most sophisticated intelligence network of their time. The Khans' YAM system used a network of spies throughout the merchant trade routes to communicate information at the rate of 200 to 300 miles per day. Later, Chiang Kai-shek's use of self-policing citizens to report on anti-communist dissidents further demonstrates China's effective rule of its complex empire by collecting and controlling data flows. Even the internet has succumbed to China's world vision. China's Great Firewall controls both the access and, by extension, the spirit of its people by banning any content that challenges the singular authority of Beijing in order to realize Mao's mass-line vision of merging the consciousness of 1.4 billion people with the consciousness of the state. Mao's vision had tragic consequences. From 1958 to 1962, in his desire to transition China from an agrarian to an industrialized communist society, Mao's great leap forward resulted in the deaths of approximately 45 million people. Most died from starvation, some from beatings and torture, and others from suicide. China will drive to achieve its ambitions, regardless of the cost. Like Mao, Xi has prioritized strengthening the party, inculcating collective socialist values, and rooting out non-believers, like the Uyghurs. What should be terrifying is not just China's domestic ambitions, but its global ambitions and the role that technology is playing as Xi competes with authoritarian ruthlessness to become the dominant world economic power.
Culture and history's collision with crises such as protests and pandemics is one reason we're experiencing the rise of surveillance states. The other driver, of course, is technology and the rapid pace of surveillance technology innovation. Regardless of culture and history, independent of current events, technology innovation has put the very concept of privacy at risk. The past 20 years have ripped science fiction out of the pages of Isaac Asimov and George Orwell and thrust them directly into our lives. The boundaries between art and science are so tenuous that a prescient warning for our present reality was a Hollywood movie.
Modern surveillance is not a single technology, but more akin to a tightly connected ecosystem made of three parts. Firstly, sensors that capture images, metadata, and more. This includes everything from CCTV cameras, mobile phones, and wearables to low Earth orbit satellites. Secondly, signal, the data created by the sensors. Surveillance signal has evolved from a series of time-lapse black and white still images taken from a considerable distance to high-definition TV. Fusion of physical and digital data has merged independent sources into an unyielding panoptic view of the entire planet. Lastly, artificial intelligence is used to make sense of the signals coming from the sensors. Instead of sifting through mountains of data for a sliver of signal that matters, AI, such as deep learning, automatically matches what is needed with increasingly breathtaking speed and accuracy. While all three aspects of surveillance necessarily function together, each one is complex enough on its own to deserve its own focus. In this spirit, we'll begin with the sensors. In 1998, there were already CCTV cameras in abundance. Drones existed, but primarily for military purposes. and the first spy satellite had already been in space for nearly 40 years. The internet was in its infancy, and surveillance sensors were limited in quantity, capability, and type. Against the backdrop of increasing tensions in the Middle East and concern over weapons of mass destruction, Lawrence Livermore National Labs was actively looking for ways to identify and track people of interest in countries such as Afghanistan and Iraq.
A researcher from Livermore found inspiration in the movie Enemy of the State, in which a fictional surveillance system called Big Daddy was used by a rogue NSA cell to mercilessly track Will Smith. This inspiration catalyzed Livermore's exploration of how a real-world Big Daddy surveillance system might be built that could identify and track foreign scientists suspected of creating weapons of mass destruction. Following the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and America's subsequent invasion of Iraq, this research became the bedrock of the military's response to the vexing problem of improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. The first fruits of this effort was Constant Hawk, which allowed the Army to move from a whack-a-mole approach to dealing with IEDs to proactively tracking and rooting out the network of people responsible for the attacks.
In 2006, following Hurricane Katrina, the FAA allowed unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, namely consumer drones, to fly in civilian airspace for the very first time as part of disaster response. By then, the iPhone had ushered in a new era in mobile. Facebook had reached widespread adoption, and Twitter was right around the corner. As if in response to the forthcoming data flood, Amazon released their Simple Storage Service, or AWS S3, as a landmark advancement in the public cloud. Innovations in surveillance technology advanced in the following years by leaps and bounds. Consumer wearables became the norm, creating a steady stream of personal health data. Body cameras were adopted in 2014 by police forces in key locations throughout the country to create an indisputable record of truth for both police and citizens. Consumer-driven surveillance in the form of Ring doorbells were launched around the same time. Fast forward to today, where the headlines include DigiDog, a Boston Scientific robot priced at $80,000, being enlisted by the NYPD in what is simply the next step in a trend of robots being used for both safety and surveillance.
But what happened to Big Daddy, the all-seeing eye hypothesized by Enemy of the State? We're close. Commercial satellites have achieved 100% coverage of the planet, and within 5 years, revisit rates will drop to an hour or less. The price per square kilometer surveilled has dropped from over $100 per kilometer to 18 cents or less. Cloud cover, the longtime enemy of satellite vision, is pierced by synthetic aperture radar to provide visibility all the way into the soil itself. Launching satellites used to be prohibitively expensive. SpaceX has almost democratized satellite launches. Earlier this year, in a single flight, SpaceX launched a record 143 satellites on the Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX's low-cost, frequent launches have made commercial satellite launches cost-effective. You pay by the kilogram and obtain a quote online. Today, the price for launching a satellite can be under $100,000 for a device built with off-the-shelf components that you can carry in your arms. You can task these satellites with apps like SpyMeSat using your smartphone. Prices range from the low hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars for images of varying quality, and they're available for purchase to anyone. The Iranian government used commercial satellite imagery to monitor Ain al-Assad air base in Iraq as it prepared to launch more than a dozen ballistic missiles at U.S. and coalition forces on January 7th, 2020.
So what happened to Big Daddy? The U.S. government didn't end up creating it. We did. As we stand here in 2021, we built a complex web of sensors from the soil to the sky through phones, drones, space flights, and social networks. The view available for purchase into the most intimate aspects of our lives makes the forecasted creepiness of Enemy of the State look quaint in comparison. Now, the progression of signal or data has been equally staggering over the past 20+ years. Given video's central role in tracking, it will be our focus. But as we showed at the Capitol insurrection, signal from social media, mobile phones, and a myriad of other sources all form the fabric of a modern surveillance network. As an example, here's how commercially available cameras have progressed since 1996. We began with sub-megapixel cameras that produce soda straw images of small areas with poor, grainy pictures, all the way to today's gigapixel cameras with high-definition resolution. On the left is an example of an image taken by Project Angel Fire in 2007, which was the Marines' Wide Area Surveillance Initiative. On the right-hand side is an image from one of the leading commercial surveillance cameras today. It is simply impossible to meaningfully reason about all of this data without machine assistance. This is the domain of artificial intelligence, from machine learning to neural networks, which complete the surveillance ecosystem. While machine learning and other types of AI contribute to surveillance, deep learning-based facial recognition is quickly becoming the foundation as it allows for automated identification of humans at scale. From its roots in Palo Alto research in the 1960s, advancements in neural networks and deep learning, coupled with billions of images from social media to train them on, have delivered facial recognition at scale and consumer quality. The most controversial use case for facial recognition is Clearview AI, which scrapes the internet to build a service used by law enforcement to match any picture of a person to billions of other images within seconds through a mobile app. At its best, child exploitation cases have been solved using Clearview AI, and horrifying abuse has been ended by equipping police with unprecedented investigative capabilities. At its worst, it foreshadows the end of privacy in public spaces. Stalkers can use this kind of technology to locate prey effortlessly. In public spaces, anyone can identify the people around them within seconds, and likely also access personal information such as their income, family members, and much more. The difference between responsible law enforcement and widespread abuse? Today, it is only a startup company's corporate usage policy and business model.
Even with all this, the biggest issue in the future is not likely to be Clearview AI in the US, but the global adoption of Chinese technology and their increasing supremacy in artificial intelligence. In an AI-powered future, the winner will be whoever has the best data. Not only does China have the most data on their own population, but with their increasing dominance in global deployments of surveillance technology, they have the best data for facial recognition and computer vision, period. Consider the number of places where Huawei's equipment is being used across the world and their visibility into communication networks. Consider the number of Chinese tourists worldwide who are driving widespread adoption of Alipay and WeChat Pay. China will soon not only have the best data for facial recognition, but a level of visibility into the global community that no one can contest. Harnessing the disruptive power of mobile broadband, China intends to link an additional 2 billion people to a global marketplace configured by Chinese technology, Chinese industrial organization, and Chinese finance.
The path to that future is being paved by two countries that stand in direct opposition to one another. Today, this great power competition is being fought with technology, and the country that can leverage its power best, collect the most signal, harness the most data, will have the long-term strategic advantage. The winner has not yet been declared, but time is not on our side. We stand at a crossroads and must decide whether we lead our societies to the future we want or follow these powers to the future that we get. Each one of us has a decision to make.
China is leading to an authoritarian future powered by surveillance technology with a global sphere of influence that, while not so entrenched it can't be reversed, is growing quickly and strategically. Xi's One Belt, One Road initiative has grown from its original vision of closing the gap between China's booming coastal cities and its impoverished interior to a project of the century that now encompasses 139 countries. In this future, individual rights, civil liberties, and any concept of privacy are subservient to the ambitions of the state.
Rather than leading to a future that embraces technology as a means of preserving the ideals of a Western liberal democracy, the United States seems to have lost its strategic ambition, and its global leadership position is slowly slipping away. Our ossified public institutions are embroiled in hyper-partisan bickering, unable to enact enduring policies that survive from one administration to the next. And our society is polarized and being pulled apart.
A healthy, functioning democracy is predicated on citizens making informed choices, and this in turn rests on the quality of the information they receive. The media, which historically enjoyed a vaulted position as the trusted primary source of news and information, has all but abdicated that responsibility, feverishly chasing virality over veracity, becoming increasingly politicized and polarized as a result. Our technology platforms only exacerbate this problem as our solidarity as a society disintegrates into tribalism. In this future, despite our best intentions, Our crumbling global sphere of influence and internal rancor prevents us from getting ahead of commercial enterprise to set the right policies and regulations that protect privacy, civil liberties, and individual rights in the face of rapid technology innovation.
And yet, there are glimmers of hope. Holding on to the vestiges of democratic principles, we can imagine a world where CCTV cameras are used to alert and stop police brutality before it turns deadly, as was almost the case when a 911 dispatcher alerted a police supervisor when she saw the CCTV footage of police officers holding down George Floyd for so long that she thought for a moment the image must be frozen.
We can imagine a world where wearable sensors and continuous biosurveillance alert doctors and patients to medical emergencies and save lives with early detection, as is the case today with continuous glucose monitoring sensors.
We can imagine a world where drones are used to support the fight against rampant wildfires, as well as time-sensitive search and rescue missions to locate missing, stranded, and injured individuals.
We can imagine a world where our respect for human life and human dignity defines every choice we make, every action we take, and every policy we enact. This world may seem out of reach, but it's within our grasp.
To get there, you have to fight for the future you want. Every person, every business leader, every politician, every policymaker, every journalist, every technologist has a role to play.
Will you lead to the future you want or follow to the future you get? The choice is yours.